You just saw people in Gaza cheering in the streets and thanking God because after 15 long, nightmarish months, it might finally be over. A ceasefire between Hamas and Israel has reportedly been reached, which is set to go into effect on January 19th, one day before Donald Trump is sworn into office. And I'm currently in a state of disbelief, and it's kind of difficult to collect my thoughts because I'm still shocked by this information. You know, when I saw the headline that Jake Sullivan was on CNN saying a ceasefire is near, I literally laughed because we've been hearing that now for more than a year, and it just seemed like it was never going to happen. So I'm not really sure how to process this information, and to be honest, I'm pretty cautious about getting too hopeful here, and for good reason, which we'll talk about, but just knowing that the people of Gaza will have some relief, even if it's temporary, just to see the looks on their faces. That is really encouraging. Now, with that being said, they've lost everything. So the world needs to move quickly to address the humanitarian crisis if this ceasefire is actually successful, and we have to keep fighting for an end to the occupation altogether. But with that being said, here's a general outline of the deal per Al Jazeera. The Israeli military will withdraw to within 2,297 feet inside Gaza. Israel will release about 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. Palestinian groups will release 33 Israeli captives. Israel will allow injured people in Gaza to travel to receive medical treatment. Also, Israel will open the Rafah crossing with Egypt 7 days after the start of the first stage. Last but not least, Israeli forces will begin to pull back from Gaza's border with Egypt, known as the Philadelphia Corridor, to withdraw from it completely in later stages. Now, at the time that I record this video, some details are still being worked out, and this is just the first phase. Phase 2, where more hostages will be released by both sides, isn't expected to be negotiated until some point during Phase 1, although as it stands right now, it really isn't a guarantee that we'll even see a Phase 2. We'll have to wait and see, but more on that later. Now, as for the deal itself, well, as Jeremy Scahill of Dropsite News reports, the terms of the deal being negotiated are largely consistent with what was on the table last May when outgoing President Joe Biden first announced it. Biden allowed Netanyahu to steamroll him for months, rewarding Israel with billions of dollars in arms transfers and political support after rejecting that ceasefire deal. In other words, the same ceasefire deal has been on the table for months, but it's only being accepted now. The question is, why? Well, Evan Hill of The Washington Post tweeted out this excerpt from a report from Susanna George of The Washington Post, which reads, "A diplomat briefed on the ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas credited progress in the talks in part to the influence of President-elect Donald Trump, saying it was the first time there has been real pressure on the Israeli side to accept a deal." And that last sentence is stunning. Holy shit. What a way to go out if you're Joe Biden. Netanyahu has refused to accept the ceasefire this entire time, knowing that there'd be no consequences whatsoever from Biden for his recalcitrance. But all of a sudden, Trump steps in, applies a little bit of pressure, and we've got a deal. Really? That is fucking wild. Now, if it sounds a little bit too good to be true, you're not wrong. But putting that aside for now, it is beyond humiliating for Joe Biden. I mean, the extent to which he has no shame can never, ever be overstated. I'm speechless, honestly. Those of us on the left have tried to warn Joe Biden for months that Netanyahu and Trump were in cahoots. He had to apply actual pressure on Netanyahu to get him to budge. He had to cut off weapons. Otherwise, there would never be a ceasefire. Because Netanyahu was waiting to see if Trump would get elected. And guess what? It paid off. Trump got elected. And Netanyahu handed Trump a major victory. And Biden now looks like a chump. Unbelievable. Like, I don't even know what to think about this. It's just so insane. Now, both Donald Trump and Joe Biden are taking credit for this. So over on Truth Social, Trump claimed it happened because of his win in November. Meanwhile, go on Twitter and you see Kamala Harris crediting Joe Biden for this ceasefire. Now, as for Joe Biden himself, well, he was asked who deserves credit between him and Donald Trump. And his response was, we'll just say, pretty indignant.
Thank you.
Books credit for this, Mr. President, you or Trump?
Is that a joke? Oh, thank you.
Wow. Listen, when it comes down to it, I don't care how it got done or who did it. I just care that it happened. So I'm not going to automatically be against something that's objectively good happening if Donald Trump did it. If all of a sudden he chooses to go full Bernie Sanders and says he supports Medicare for all, I'm not going to be like, actually, I don't support Medicare for all because Trump does support it. I care about policy, not politicians. Trump's not going to do that. But I mean, the point that I'm making is I'm not going to, scoff at good things happening for partisan reasons. Having said that, though, let's be very, very clear. So the timing about this tells us a lot about this deal. It'll go into effect on Joe Biden's last full day as president. At any time during the last 15 months, he could have conditioned aid and actually applied real pressure to Netanyahu, but he refused to do that. So after hearing for a year that a ceasefire was just around the corner, the question is, well, why now? Why did it happen on Biden's last day in office? I mean, if this is fundamentally the same deal that he originally negotiated back in May of last year, if he is responsible and does want to take credit, isn't it embarrassing that it's only happening now, right before Trump is inaugurated? I mean, why, if Biden is to take credit, is this happening now? What changed? What's different? Why did Israel suddenly have a change of heart? See, here's the thing. Joe Biden is full of shit. And objectively speaking, I'm sorry, based on the current information that we have, Trump does get credit for this. I'm not going to be a hack and say, oh, actually, Biden was playing 4D chess. No. It just seems like Occam's razor here. Trump came in and the deal happened. So he gets credit, at least temporarily. But with that being said, the ceasefire that Trump helped to facilitate will likely come at a great cost because of his involvement. So before you all give him too much credit, which he does deserve credit for this, there's a caveat, right? So Netanyahu only agreed to hand Trump a win and end the genocide, at least temporarily, because he's getting something very big in return, specifically the West Bank. Now, in an interview with Dropsite News, Gaza analyst Mohammed Shahada gives us a lot of context. And we're going to watch a 3-minute clip. As you're going to see, this is packed with information, so listen closely. But what he says here is really hard to digest.
Your assessment of how significant Trump's interventions have been since he became the president-elect?
Monumental. So until recently, mediators would tell me that everything would change if Biden would only name and shame Netanyahu, call him out publicly for rejecting and refusing the ceasefire repeatedly since May last year. So basically, everything that was changed is just Trump jumping in and doing that, nothing more. All he needed to do was just apply a little bit of pressure on Netanyahu and say, get a deal done. Netanyahu got it done immediately. Whereas for Biden, as a senior Arab diplomat put it recently to me, she said, Biden is just ideological. Trump is transactional. He's a businessman. Biden, his heart is in it. He's fully devoted to supporting Israel. And he sees any pressure on Israel as, quote, tainting his legacy. He wants his legacy to be the most pro-Israeli president there is ever. So he chose that legacy over Kamala Harris's chance or opportunity to win. Now with Trump, there is another dimension, as Dr. Sami mentioned, there's a transactional dimension that we don't know about yet. We know, of course, that Trump's pressure on Netanyahu sealed the deal. That is something that is undoubted. In the very last minutes of the negotiations, Netanyahu tried to maneuver by insisting on a couple hundred meters of the buffer zone. So now it's 700 meters. He wanted it to be 900 instead. And then Steve Witkoff had to press him and get that compromise out of him, and other issues as well, without which a deal would have never been sort of completed. But on the other hand, we are getting reports from Israeli media that are saying that Trump gave Netanyahu a gift bag in return, and that gift bag includes a promise to allow Israel to violate the ceasefire and provide them with cover for it. So in other words, to resume the war in Gaza as soon as the first phase is completed, never going into phase 2, just getting 33 hostages out and then back to war again. The gift bag also reportedly includes lifting all Israeli settlers, extremists, settler organizations, Israeli shady tech companies like NSO that is responsible for the Pegasus spyware, lifting all sanctions on those companies and individuals. And number 3, allowing Israel a major chunk, a major land grab or land theft in the West Bank. So that might be the case. It checks out. The other thing is that this morning, until the very last minute, we're getting reports from Netanyahu saying that he's telling Bezalel Smotrich, no, don't worry. It's only going to be a pause. It's not the end of the war. We will resume the war again. And in return, Smotrich asking for, quote, forcing Gazan migration as one of his conditions, is that even if there is a ceasefire, even if the war ends, you need to maintain conditions in Gaza as hell on earth, make it as uninhabitable as possible, ban concrete and cement from going in like Israel did in 2014, prevent reconstruction, and then people will leave, will have no option but to leave or face death by starvation, cold, or disease. So that's pretty much it.
Okay, there's a lot there, but first and foremost, even though this is a ceasefire, Israel has no plans to let Gazans return to their homes because we all know that they want that land for themselves. And an ominous thing that he said was that Trump gave Netanyahu a gift bag for agreeing to this deal. And that includes presumably 3 things. 1, a promise that Israel can violate the ceasefire and the United States will provide cover for them while they violate the ceasefire after a certain point. 2, lifting sanctions on Israeli settlers. And 3, major annexation of land in the West Bank. How major? We don't know. So this appears to be a short-term victory for the Palestinians in exchange for long-term pain. And this ceasefire might be a ruse so that way Trump can take office, boast about securing a deal and releasing some hostages, and then turning a blind eye to whatever happens next after he has his George W. Bush mission accomplished moment and gets to claim that he's a hero. So sure, I do think that Trump deserves credit for this deal, but in the event the worst case scenario comes to fruition because of this deal and Israel starts bombing Gaza again and then annexes a significant portion of the West Bank, Trump also has to accept responsibility for that as well if this was indeed part of the agreement that got Netanyahu to come to the table. Now, if it turns out that none of that happens and Trump just straight up stepped in and ended the genocide, he gets all the credit in the world. But as you can tell, I'm not ready to congratulate him on a job well done just yet because, as Mohammed pointed out, Trump is transactional, right? And there are conflicts of interest here that we have to be mindful of. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, would love to own an auction beachfront property on Gaza. Trump himself took $100 million from Miriam Adelson on the condition that he lets Israel annex the entire West Bank. So I'm comfortable for now admitting that Trump deserves credit for the ceasefire. That's objectively good, but ultimately the devil is in the details. What matters is what happens after the ceasefire, if it's only temporary, if there are these conditions that really are attached to it. I mean, Trump will sell out Palestinians in a heartbeat if he thinks that there's something to be gained from it. It goes back to the transactional nature of him as a person, as Mohammed pointed out. But Mohammed also described Biden as ideological, which is correct. This has been evident for a very long time now. Biden genuinely believes in Israel's Zionist project, and he was more than willing to let Israel massacre as many Palestinians as they wanted to in the name of that colonial project, to the point where he was willing to jeopardize Kamala Harris's chances of defeating Donald Trump. Now, with that being said, Kamala Harris is a grown woman, and she could have pulled a Humphrey. She could have distanced herself from Joe Biden. She didn't have to tether herself to that sinking ship, but she refused to do that, and it cost her greatly. Now, leftists like myself warned Democrats that this is something that could cost her the election, and come to find out, it actually did cost her big time. Per YouGov, a poll released Wednesday, January 15th by IMEU Policy Project in YouGov found what few in the Democratic Party have been willing to admit. Vice President Harris lost votes because of the Biden administration's support for Israel's genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. 29% of voters nationally who voted for Biden in 2020 and did not vote for Kamala Harris in 2024 say ending Israel's violence in Gaza was the top issue affecting their vote choice. When Biden 2020 voters who did not vote for Harris in 2024 were asked which of the following issues were most important in deciding your vote, these were the issues that they selected. And as you can see, Gaza was the biggest reason why these voters stayed home, even though they voted for Biden in 2020, citing Gaza as a bigger factor than the economy, which tells you a lot. But there's more. In close battleground states, these were the percentages of voters who didn't vote for Kamala Harris because of her position on Gaza. As you can see, 38% in Arizona, 32% in Michigan and Wisconsin, and 19% in Pennsylvania. Finally, 36% of 2020 Biden voters who didn't vote for Harris said they would have been more likely to vote for Harris if she broke with Biden and promised to withhold weapons from Israel. And even among the 2020 Biden voters who did vote for Harris, 35% said that they would have been more enthusiastic to vote for her if she broke with Biden. In other words, she sacrificed her chances at becoming the president because of Israel. Now, when it comes to that last group of people who sucked it up and voted for Harris anyway, you might think that their level of enthusiasm is irrelevant because their vote was all that mattered, but it did matter because those people would have maybe encouraged their friends to vote for Kamala Harris too. Maybe they would have donated or phone banked or canvassed for Kamala Harris if they were actually excited about her and didn't just feel like they were voting for the lesser of two evils. So this issue didn't just cost Kamala Harris votes. It demoralized the Democratic Party's base, even the people who voted for her. And you know, I want to say I told you so, but what's the point? I don't give a shit about being right. I wish I were wrong. But sometimes, you know, you're right and you're called out for being right if you're right too soon and liberals shit on you for it and could have been prevented. I don't know what to think anymore. This whole past year has been so demoralizing. But come to find out, the issue really did matter. It played a significant role in Kamala Harris's loss. So, masterful gambit, Democrats. Good job, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. You let Netanyahu play you like a fucking fiddle, and you're leaving the White House with no power and blood on your hands. Good job. And now, Trump and the Republican Party, they are stronger than ever, more emboldened than ever. Was it worth it? I mean, what are you getting out of this? Netanyahu's getting a lot out of this. He's potentially getting the West Bank. What are you getting out of this? Kamala could have been the president of the United States if she just did the right thing, the common sense thing, the strategic thing. But she didn't. What, out of loyalty to Biden? I don't get it. I am genuinely perplexed by the behavior of this administration. And I'd be remiss to not point out this old tweet from the Gravel Institute, who predicted all of this before Biden even secured the nomination. They tweeted this back in 2019, quote, "If Democrats nominate Joe Biden, he may win and will have 4 years of weak, feckless Democratic leadership. And then, in 4 years, he'll be defeated by a Republican Party even more openly white nationalist. If you nominate an Obama redux, you'll just get a worse Trump redux." And here we are. So getting back to the ceasefire, I am happy for now, but I'm still worried. I'm worried for what's to come. So we'll just have to take it one day at a time. I hope that it works out, and I hope that this really is a permanent ceasefire. I'm crossing my fingers. But regardless if, this deal goes through at all or fails at the last minute, we all have to continue to raise our voices for Palestinian human rights, because an end to the genocide isn't going to facilitate an end to the occupation, and we can never stop speaking out for Palestinians until they are fully liberated. But justice isn't enough. There needs to be accountability for the perpetrators of these crimes, and that doesn't just include Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. That includes Joe Biden and Antony Blinken specifically, who aided and abetted these war criminals in Israel at every fucking step of the way. If there was any justice in the world, they'd both spend the rest of their pathetic lives behind bars for crimes against humanity, but we all know that's not going to happen. So the best that we get is the satisfaction of knowing that Biden's lasting legacy will be genocide, and my hope is that he lives long enough to see all of society and all of the world come to that realization and view him as the war criminal that he is.